Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Westerville City Schools Board of Education. We are delighted to have all of you this evening. There will be two opportunities this evening to address the board. The first being Agenda Item 6.1. The first set of public comments is relative to Agenda Items 7.1 through 11.5. Please state the agenda items you're referencing at the beginning of your comments. The second opportunity will be Agenda Item 12.1. There's a sign-up sheet located on the table in the back of the room, and each speaker will have 5 minutes to address the board, and a timer will be shown on the screen. And with that, Ms. Marshall, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Bell?
Here.
Mrs. Altman?
Here.
Dr. Nesterbaker?
Here.
Mrs. Meyer?
Here.
Mrs. Davidson?
Here. Will you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, up first tonight, we have district highlights and recognitions, and 3.1, school board recognition. I will pass it over to Dr. Kellogg.
Thank you, President Davidson, members of the board. Every January is an opportunity for us to recognize school boards across the country for the work that you all do. And so Ms. Marshall and I have a couple of things we want to do this evening. We've got a mishmash of opportunities. We're going to start this evening. I'd like to invite Lula to the podium. You know you've arrived when you're simply recognized by one name. There's Cher, Madonna, and Lula. So Lula, the podium is yours this evening if you'd like to start us off with some school board recognition.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. First, I want to start it. My name is Lula. Everybody, hopefully they know me. If you don't know me, I'm Lula Mohammed Abdullah, and I work for Westerville City School. I work with this beautiful family that has been asking me for, I think, months and months to the recognition for everybody that works, more the board that does so much for the family and the student. They would call me, they would tell me what is going on and how they receive information every day. Of course, they know Dr. Kellogg because those letters is signed at the bottom. They get the information, they get the information, they get the information where they share with me, you know, other schools don't give so much information, and they like to have more information. And they like, you know, the communication, what is going on, and, you know, of course, everybody's here today. Also, we know that you guys are also the muscles of Dr. Kellogg. Yes, so that's how they really described it. And I'm sure that you guys agree with that, right? Yeah, and we just came here to say thank you and give you a little reward. Javier, come here with the reward. You have the reward. This reward, literally, this father brought it all the way to Canada, and we're supposed to laminate it, but the people, not laminated, but engraved, and the guy said, we can't because it's a glass, and this is this. We feel like that you guys, this is the world, that you guys hold in the Westerville City School. This is for everybody that helps these families. And please, it's not only Somali, they are different country really. It's amazing. It's a lot of people who's, you know, brought this together. And they just want to recognize you, all of you. And everybody that works under, of course, the school administrators, teachers, counselors, everybody is doing a good job. But it starts with you, of course. That's all we hear today. Nothing more. Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
So a couple of other things for the board this evening. There is a bag that was on your table and just a couple of trinkets that we put together for you as a gift. There's I believe there's an engraved coffee tumbler, which It's got a portrait of a graduate on there, so we don't forget. There's a little notepad on there, so you can write things for me to do. It's like a Kellogg and Marshall to-do list pad, and we'll know where that came from. It's got the portrait of a graduate on that sucker, too. So we just wanted to provide those as a little recognition as well. I think one of the things Nicole and I talk about with this particular board that we really, really value, there's lots of work that we've gotten done over the years, and we could rattle that off from the last year. But I think the thing that we've talked about that we appreciate the most from this board is your total commitment to public education. And as you see around the country and within our state, some of the work that's going on there, and some of the measures that seem contrary to what we're trying to do in our mission to provide service for kids, you have all remained just steady as a rock in that space. Communicate that's the importance of that to our community, to our society, to our state as a whole. And we, I know, as we talk about that, appreciate that. I'm going to read just a little proclamation that's come from the state of Ohio in your honor. And then Nicole has something to share. So this is the state of Ohio. Whereas more than 700 boards of education oversee and manage the personal and properties of school districts throughout Ohio, and whereas school board members are elected to establish the policies that provide the framework for their schools, and whereas school board members devote hours of their time each week to providing leadership to their local schools, and whereas school boards fill an important role with members creating and monitoring district plans to make sure students have the tools and skills to reach their full potential, and whereas school boards maintain communications with all segments of their communities to keep the public informed of district activities, whereas school board members advocate for the best interests of the students served in their districts, and whereas it is important that communities support school boards so that students receive the best education and are prepared to be leaders of tomorrow. And now, therefore, we, not me, Mike DeWine and John Husted, Governor and Lieutenant Governor of the state of Ohio, do hereby recognize January School Board Recognition Month. So that's an honor from the state I'd like to share. I'm going to turn over to Nicole.
So, you know, we have to do our own Westerville thing, right? So Dr. Kellogg and I wrote a proclamation designating January 2023 as School Board Recognition Month in Westerville City School District. So I'm going to read that to you. Whereas the Westerville City School District community values quality public education as a vital step along the pathway to success for its children. And whereas the Board of Education members, Jennifer Altman, Vaughn Bell, Tracy Davidson, Christy Meyer, and Dr. Nancy Nesterbaker have been elected by their constituents to set the policies and procedures that govern all aspects of the school district's operations. And whereas these local decision makers work tirelessly and contribute greatly to the overall success of our community through their individual, collective, and dedicated service to our schools. And whereas the Board of Education sets and keeps our attention focused on progress towards the school district's goals, and whereas these school board members maintain two-way communications with all segments of the community while serving with integrity, honor, and commitment of our children's futures. Now therefore be it resolved that we, Dr. John Kellogg and Nicole Marshall, do hereby recognize and extend our community's appreciation to the members of our Board of Education by proclaiming the month of January 2023 as School Board Recognition Month in the Westerville City School District. We encourage all Westerville City School District residents to join us in recognizing the dedication and hard work of our local school board members as we all work together to build and maintain an education system that meets the needs of both today's and tomorrow's children. Thank you.
So we appreciate the opportunity to recognize you for your service. Lula and friends, thank you for being here this evening and sharing that recognition. That means, I know that meant a lot to us and I think to the board. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Ms. Davidson.
Thank you. I'm a little choked up. So can we pause for 1 second so we can shake some hands out there and then come right back? Is that okay? Okay, moving on to reports. 4.1, Trauma-Informed Resilience-Focused Schools. And we're delighted to welcome Tammy Santa and Jesse Martin. It's okay.
All right. Good evening, President Davidson, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, Mrs. Marshall. We are beyond thrilled to be here to present this content for you this evening. I'm going to take the lead. There's not a lot of slides, so I'm going to take the lead on the slides, but these three and a dog behind me would really encourage you to ask questions as we go, or at the end. My three colleagues here have an equal passion and knowledge base and expertise in this trauma and resilience journey. So for those that don't know, with me, from my left to right, looking at them is Noelle Spriester-Spa, Jesse Martin, and Sheila Ebrecht. So they are on our mental health team, fellow social workers, and just have a lot of passion towards this topic. So with that, we're going to try and move fast. And again, I think it's going to serve us to kind of move through the slides and then have you ask questions of what still needs clarified. It's going to be hard to fit a clear understanding of what we're doing here, but we'll do our best. So we're going to go through a little bit of what it is, why we think it is important, and then Westerville's approach to this work. So we'll start with what it is, and for us, there's a few pieces on this slide. First, we just want you to know it's Star Commonwealth. That is where we're getting our training and certification. So you're welcome to do a deeper dive on STAR's work. For us, we stumbled into their trainings almost 15 years ago now. And some of the reasons we stayed with STAR was, one, they've been doing this work for over 100 years, so that was really important to us. Just well referred from other colleagues in this circle. And their core values and equity roots really align with Westerville City Schools and the work we're doing. So just really important to us to choose that component when going through with the rest of the plan. You'll hear us say trauma-informed, resilient-focused schools, spaces. We just want it to be clear that this work goes into any space within our district. So we try and, use spaces often, but it truly is. If it's schools, spaces, any area within our district, this work will serve really well. And what is it as far as, is it a curriculum? Is it a program? For us, it is not. This is a very broad approach and really a shift in mindset to how we view children and how we approach the work that we do. So this should embed into things that we're already doing well, just helps us really look at different ways to approach our spaces. And then we talk about the foundational content. You'll hear that a lot. And what we mean by that are just these 10 steps. Well, that's on a later slide. But we'll refer back to these 10 steps that help create these spaces. And that is the foundational coursework that takes about a day, 6 to 8 hours to deliver. And again, with a huge focus on the resilience component. Trauma's the big word out there, has been for a while. For us, that's important, but more important for us to focus on the building of characteristics of the resilience pieces in this model. And then maybe a harder question sometimes to answer is, how are we going to embed this into our schools? We have a long-range plan, a short-term and a long-range plan, but really through a coaching model, trying to get people building this infrastructure on a couple different tiers and then delivering it with several people at buildings and in other spaces to be able to guide people through how to really implement the material in the best way. So a very quick overview of what it is. And then we'll move into why should we do it? We could spend all day here. Outside of the obvious, we have homes, and then we have schools is the next best place where we get students for a lot of hours. So that's the big piece for us. We've got a great opportunity in front of us to deliver this content outside of the homes, and that is in our schools. It's important to hear that this helps all students, regardless of background, regardless of history, and that is really important for us. And then if you look at statistics, unfortunately, this is also a why behind it. So as a mental health group, we're constantly looking at statistics. We're looking at our national statistics, our local statistics, and what does that look like in Westerville. So what we did on this slide, for clarification, is we took the national statistics that we look at often, and we projected those onto our own data. So if you look at about 15,000 students for us, and that first line item, nationally, it's about 50% of children have experienced a childhood trauma, right? So for us in Westerville, that's about half of our student body. The next one, you look at nationwide, it's about 60% have been exposed to a crime or violence. So again, for us, that's a pretty high number. And then unfortunately, we're watching the most recent statistics come out regarding suicidal ideations and attempts. Again, these are reported, so data is data. There's still a lot that's not reported. These subsets come from various sources of the CDC. But the important piece to keep in mind here is that it's not, trauma resilience approaches are not just for 5% of our kids or a small group. It's going to help everybody, but it's really going to be important to help those that do have heavy stories. Some that we know, many that we don't. And so this is the bright spot for us, is this resiliency piece. You could do all sorts of diving in the research here, and what's really uplifting for us is that you get to build these skills. And that happens when you have these positive adults showing up day after day and fostering those characteristics of resilience despite the trauma history or the heavy stories. And we cannot control those data marks, right? We can't control what happens outside of our control, but we have full control over building resilience in our students. That's great for all kids. It's really, really important for those who have heavy stories. So just our big piece here on why we get to have the opportunity to build those skills. And then lastly, when you look at STAR's research and research outside of STAR as well, when you begin to implement trauma and resilience work with consistency in all of the spaces, with fidelity, these are the great things that will start to happen. And we wouldn't pursue something with so much time and energy on our end if we didn't fact check those works as well. So for us to be able to go into spaces and look at other districts that have implemented this, to see the improvements and the reductions in those areas really speaks to us. And as far as background from us, we spent a lot of our time in Westerville in our SLCs that came with a lot of behavior and a lot of mental health. So 10 years ago, when we started showing up to these trainings and learning this content, I think Dr. Nestor Baker and I sat around some similar tables at FCFC many, many years ago, same content. But we started, you'd go to trainings, you'll sometimes come back and apply it, sometimes can't, sometimes apply it, it flops. For us, we would go apply this directly into our SLCs and be so excited to tell each other what was working, right? So that's when it started to tread for us, when we got to apply it directly, see the student impact, and then started to stretch a little bit on truly these outcomes. Case by case is how it started, and then we started to pick up pieces from there. So a little bit about what, a little bit about why, and then what is this going to look like for Westerville? We think that we've got a pretty great plan moving forward, and it's just really starting to pick up a lot of steam right now. So in the past, this was 10, 12 years ago, that the four of us, without really knowing each other very well, were figuratively and literally sitting at the same training tables, and it just kept resonating with us. So we kept showing back up at the same tables, and then we did have an opportunity during the COVID days to complete full training through Star Commonwealth. So the four of us are fully accredited to train this material. And so we started to think since then, how can we bring this into our schools? Fast forward, last year, we talked 55 people into coming along the journey. We had them represented from all of our spaces, all of our levels. Out of the 55, 54 completed. And that was about 30 hours of content that they went along for that journey with us and completed that piece. The core team stands for Champions of Resilience. So that was our original group of great humans in Westerville that went along with that. You can then go on to another tier of understanding and training, and that's called the coaches training. That's 2 more days. So out of that 54, 30 went on to complete the 2 days of training. Just gives you a lot more tools and ability to then start coaching other people within your building and within classrooms and spaces. And then this year, we couldn't be busier with trainings in all sorts of spaces. So we are at our all administrator meeting. So every administrator is about halfway through the content, that foundational content. Thanks to Cheryl and Kate, we are now in the elementary instructional coaches meetings and training all elementary instructional coaches on top of 25 extra people they allowed us to bring into those meetings. Our counselors are well on their way. And then we just started to find other pockets, right? I think once the administrators have heard us talking about this for a very long time, now that they've seen it for almost 6 months now, right, then you start getting the calls on like, well, let's get into these different spaces. So we're really starting to build that infrastructure, which is really exciting. That's what we need to do. We really would love to have, great core teams in every space that we have, and that's what is happening now. So as we look forward, we have a lot of hopes, the four of us, but we really hope that foundational content, those 10 steps that we'll show you here in a moment, it's like a non-negotiable for every employee, right? You get that foundational content, and then from there you can go all sorts of other places, but the foundational is where we all kind of sit from and are aware of that foundational piece. You can then go on to get the coaching and the other levels while refreshing, maintaining, making sure that we're doing all of that thoughtfully. So that is the hope, that we continue to build that infrastructure, then add the coaches to that layer, and so on and so forth. Wilder sits in a unique situation where we had a very excited principal talk STAR into a certification track. So they're on their own accreditation journey, fully funded from STAR, just to see what we can do at Wilder. So that's a little bit of an offshoot of what the work we're doing. But STAR is running that one for us with a couple folks there. So that's our quick Westerville part there. And then our portrait work. We've been doing this work for a while now, and the obvious piece is obviously going to be the social emotional wellness piece. This fits right in more ways than we can explain on the social emotional wellness component. However, when you do go through each of the steps and all of the training, you can see where it does really connect in many, many ways to our portrait work. But we'll continue to watch those connections, knowing that overall that social emotional wellness piece is really what stands out for us. So here's the foundational content that we keep referring to. And each one's probably got about an hour's worth of really fun pieces. So to try and roll through it, but this is what we say when this used to be 12, 14 hours worth of content. STAR's also been a collaborator to say this is not going to go 30 hours. We can't get 30 hours of content into every educator's hands in their old model. So they've been able to condense it into a school, more deliverable model so that this can be delivered in a day. We are just now starting that with our instructional coaches. So we're running through it for the first time in that shorter clock. But this is the content that you go through and really dive into all the details of each step. to really take a look at what we're doing well already, where can we really take a step back and do better, and then what are we at the mercy of other system errors, right? So there's just a lot of pieces in each step, but this is what we will refer to over and over and would give you the first layer of certification as a trauma-informed, resilient-focused specialist. And then we could talk a lot about this. So the one thing to hear is we already do great trauma-informed, resilient-focused work. Some of that's already happening in a lot of our spaces, which is wonderful. We just want it to be more consistent and more embedded within our fabric every single day. And an easy example is our previous days of our color clip chart systems, right? That would not be a trauma-informed, resilient-focused way to teach and learn behavior and appropriateness. And Barbara Wallace understood that, right? So when you come in and you're not leading with shame, that is where you're flipping that mindset into a trauma-informed, resilient-focused lens, where you can still teach things in that classroom, but they come in a very regulated teaching model and through a trauma-informed lens. So there's where we're trying to shift on a constant basis. For us, just the prevention side, you want to really look at, we know we're seeing lots of levels of dysregulation, more than we've ever seen it. And so how are we teaching the basics of regulation and co-regulation and taking that brainstem and knowing you've got to regulate before you can get up into the cortex. So what are the strategies we're teaching every single day that are trauma-informed and resilient-focused so that when dysregulation occurs and when you've got a desk flipped over, that your response to that is trauma-informed and resilience-focused and skill-building instead of shame-based and punitive and all the things, right? Our goal is to keep kids in our classrooms and in our spaces and in our schools. So it's not an easy solution, but this content delivers those really small mindset shifts and strategies that help you get there from tier 1 all the way through tier 3. And we could go through lots and lots of examples of how that's already working, where we're working towards, but those are just lots and lots of examples of where we would reach towards on those steps. So we'll let you ask a little bit of questions to get more specifics of that. I would say the last thing we want to leave you with is it's hard, and we've talked to a lot of administrators that have been through half the content, and they're like, now I get it. Now it's starting to make sense, even though we've been overly excited about it for a long time. Fair. So we would invite you to come to any of our trainings. We can give you the upcoming ones. I have a feeling we'll be busy for a while with new trainings and new trainings and new trainings. So there'll be a lot of opportunities, and we would love for you to come sit, as a board member through the content and see it from your lens. And it's going to make a little bit more sense when you're able to sit in those, 6, 8, 10 hours of content. So with that, I know the 3 behind me would be happy to answer any questions that you guys have. Oh, yes, thank you, Jesse. So Jesse is going to give you, sometimes people ask, who are the trainers again? Who are the specialists? Who are the coaches? So this is an exhaustive list of who has completed it in our district and who is working towards it in progress. What was our final number on that? And you can kind of get a glimpse of which schools, right? I mean, it's kind of broken down for you by name, position, and school. So that might help you as well. Just kind of see a more specific view of what we've been working on in the past year and 6 months. True.
Ready for some questions?
Yeah, don't let them sneak away.
Oh, I saw her trying to slink away there. I'm going to shame you into staying.
Put a chart up.
Yes, that's got it. A couple of questions for you, and a couple of comments. One, I'm wondering if one of you could give an example or some thoughts, if you would share. You mentioned that resilience is more important than trauma in the model that we're looking at, and I understand that. But as people think about that and wrestle with what that actually means, I'm wondering if you could describe a little bit about the connections between our work to help children and families and staff members who deal with trauma, and then how that connects to our efforts to build resilience.
I think we're just all going to kind of jump in and answer. I would just start with regulated brains learn. Your brain has to be regulated in order to learn. And so some people coming in from home situations or with past experiences that have severely impacted their ability to regulate, this work is vital. But I have a lot of students who are very bright and very anxious, who also tremendously benefit from the ability to self-regulate, co-regulate, and communicate. So this work helps support all students in that way, but for me, it always comes down to the brain. But it really comes down to regulated brains learn. Stressed brains can't learn. So this work helps anyone who's learning. It helps to kind of get into a space where they can be successful.
I think that's a really important point, because sometimes people get hung up on the word trauma, and they think of trauma centers and so forth. And it's a tough phrase to work with because people have preconceived notions about it. But you're talking about everything along the continuum of specific acute trauma through toxic stress, through seasons of anxiety, through continua anxiety. It's extraordinarily important.
Absolutely.
Noel, would you, no, because I think I recall you were doing some specific work with IB students at South in this space, were you not?
Yes.
Maybe a little bit more in that, what you were doing there with them, that might be.
Yeah,
that might
absolutely. We found that for our high achievers, students who are just really do well academically and tend to put a lot on their plate, that sometimes you get to the point where they weren't able to be successful, they would shut down, they would get caught up in perfectionism and not be able to turn in anything because everything wasn't perfect, things like that. And for the IB spaces, we found that by going into the spaces and really working on these core skills of regulation, but also using some of this trauma-informed work and resilience-focused work to create spaces that allowed them to self-regulate within the space, within the work. So incorporating moments of learning, taking in the work, and then co-regulating, working with other students, having the teachers help frame their efforts and their behaviors in certain ways that help them kind of reinterpret it, they were able to not burn out, essentially. They were able to regulate. So they would, an example of this is we would go in and focus on self-care as a intentional way to be academically successful. Oftentimes we look at self-care as kind of a bonus and a thing you do to the side, but framing self-care activities that regulate as necessary in order to get your brain into a space where you can take in new information and then create new things, that kind of help refocus some of their interpretations. We spend a lot of time, again, with regulation.
So,
I was just going to add, one of the parts of your question, you were talking about connecting trauma and resilience and how we don't always need to know what the trauma is and what's going on in a student's life. And sometimes they don't know. They don't have the ability to communicate what has happened. Part of the training is going through trauma and resilience themes. So there are themes that we kind of pendulate between. So if a student feels unsafe, then the resilience theme is building that safety and that sense of community. If a student has fear, then we pendulate to resilience on hope. So a lot of times we can find what area of resilience to focus on based on the behaviors we see. So if a student is voicing that they don't feel safe in school, what are things that we can do to make them feel like they belong? So we do talk about those themes.
And I think that's important for all students. They all have sadness and fears, but how do you get to the resilient side? And I think the one thing we liked about this program is there's lots of practical application. I mean, I love talking about philosophy and thinking about things, but this also gives you tools that you don't just have to be counselors or mental health people to do. I think that's what we really liked about STAR and the trainings.
So I'm worried about a little bit of the terminology, and so people understand. Can you give us some examples of some dysregulation and some ways to regulate that might be useful for anyone that's a little nervous?
Well, if you think about it, everyone dysregulates.
Right.
And as adults, we've figured out ways to regulate our bodies. So whether that is tapping pins, shaking our foot, petting a dog, right? So all of these are strategies that we've developed over time that have worked for us to keep us in the moment, keep us engaged in activities, and keep us in a space where we can learn. So some children don't have those coping strategies yet or don't know what works for them yet. So that's part of what we would be doing to look at regulation skills. So it can be as simple as that, but dysregulation could be any form of outward behavior or internal that your heart rate starts to elevate and you start to get hot. All of those signs of anxiety, and the higher you get in that, the less you are connected to what's going on and able to learn.
Most behavior, especially most behavior that results in discipline, is dysregulation.
Right.
And you think about it in my elementary world, like kindergartners are all dysregulated. I mean, like lots of elementary students, they come in and they, don't know how to sit or they need to walk around the classroom. It's just simple ways to get them engaged and simple ways to help their body. And we really work a lot on just those body sensations, like how do you feel? What does your body feel like? What does it feel like when it's feeling hopeful or feeling safe and settled? So I think those are all important tools
Yeah,
that we
that's-
all experience.
As we get to the high school level, we fine tune it. It's more things you can do in your chair. It's less obvious. It's breathing techniques, focusing on mindfully breathing in as you hold your fingers, push as hard as you can, and then breathing out and pushing all the air out to reset that vagus nerve, reset the part of your brain that helps in the stress response. And then just going through 4 deep breaths on your hand. You can do it at your desk. And students feel like they have some control over their anxiety or over their dysregulation or stress and are able to then move forward.
So it sounds like if a student's acting out, like there's tools, you can see that, you can help them regulate. What about the kids that are sitting quietly, that are like shoving it down? Is this something that is kind of talked about to the whole class of, hey, we may be having some anxiety, or this is some tools that you could do?
Part of this training, as Jesse was talking about, it is specific to when it becomes externalized and you see the big behavior,
Yeah.
but then also what this looks like when it becomes internalized. And so we talk about that with the people who go through the training on what it can look like in each of those states, 100%.
Absolutely. And just as important
Yeah.
as students are acting out. Absolutely. And I think one thing, a part of the training, they talk about universal needs for everyone. There's like 4 in the circle of courage with belonging, generosity, independence, and mastery. And that's for everybody. We all need those. We all need to feel
Coincidentally,
connected.
That's what, we also need to feel motivated.
Absolutely.
Intrinsic motivation are also those 4 key things.
So, I'm sorry, so during like a normal class period, I know there's so much that's going on, so much to be taught. So what does something like that look like? I mean, if someone's trained in that, how are they utilizing those different skills to help the children, or those tools to help the children?
I can give an example at the high school for one of our staff who've gone through it. They have the students come in, and it's, I also have a background in a lot of us doing the Bruce Perry NME stuff. We know regulation is key as a part of this, and STAR gives us a lot of examples of how to use regulation. So they will have students come in to their bell ringer. As they come in, there's always a song playing, and students always have a warm-up activity. And so that could be coloring, that could be journaling, that could be playing with the fidget, or that could be checking in with the teacher. And so students know if they're having a day where they're just not feeling it, they're feeling really stressed out, and they don't feel like any of these fidgets or coloring are going to help calm them down, they can check in with the teacher. But if they come in just a little dysregulated, need a second to breathe, they grab some markers, they start coloring. Every single day they start with music and regulation. And so that's an easy, but they went through this, they didn't start that. until they started this, because they connected, they had done pieces of it every once in a while, but they realized like how much it helped to give a space, and also to remove the stigma of asking for additional support for days when I'm not feeling it. It's okay to say, I need a bit extra more support, I need an extra fidget to use during class, not just during the warm-up, things like that.
I would say some other pretty basic things that teachers can do to help in a classroom is thinking about managing their environment. Because there can be so much in an environment that can be overstimulating for students. So managing the environment, having alternate seating, and teaching students how to use those types of spaces. And even just the language we use in the classroom. A lot of what we talk about in trauma work is coming from a place of curiosity and wonder. And so if you have a student that's struggling, being able to come at it with what's happening with the student instead of what's wrong with the student. So that's when we talk about that mindset shift of how we view students and how they're behaving.
So I'm thinking about something I hear out in the world a lot. I'm not saying in our schools or in Westerville, but you hear a lot. People say, well, you know, kids' behavior is so terrible these days. Like, we don't have adequate discipline. It's just like the discipline end. And you hear that quite a bit. And so, you know, you were mentioning like a lot of disciplinary problems are essentially dysregulation problems, right? So I guess for me, for other people who might hear that, knowing what you all know, how might you respond to that in a way where we can help shift people's thinking or at least offer something that they might think about a little bit?
And the trainings don't say that we should take away natural consequences or logical consequences. It's just the way we also look at behavior, like Jesse was saying, that mindset and shifting that mindset to really looking at what happened or being curious and really thinking about ways to kind of reframe different behaviors.
We
Go ahead.
believe in accountability.
Yeah.
And that's, I think a lot of people feel like, well, you're not holding them accountable. You're taking away the consequence. And I think it's important to remind them that we believe in accountability. It's equipping with the tools. Do you want to talk about yoga?
Yeah, so I got the privilege to go observe some social workers at South, and sometimes it's yoga club, sometimes it's in lieu of detention. You can go to yoga club. And 8 for 8 of these individuals were there in lieu of a detention. And a little hesitant coming in. But when I say it was one of the most beautiful things I've seen, so again, right, that I can't speak to those classrooms or those situations of what led them to this infraction. I think we can, even do some more preventative things within our spaces. But if we do have to restore, right, the goal is to restore behavior and not repeat it, right? So this was the opportunity where they came in, not the most excited, and they were 8 for 8, the most engaged students I got to watch.
Almost always.
And again, they fought it the whole way down the hallway. I helped a few get to the right space, but it was beautiful once they got there. And then they were like, "So what do I have to get a detention to come back, Miss Noel?" And I'm like,
no, they can come back for yoga club.
but then they get to come to yoga club. So that's how they get more yoga club participants, is because they actually learn, they do an activity, they talk about the regulation piece, what happened to get them into the, original situation. I mean, there's a lot of thought, but that's the teaching and the instruction. Again, this is on the reactionary end, I'll still take it, right over sitting in a room and not learning anything and building any skills. But that's, right, this is not an no consequence, right? And that gets confusing sometimes. We are about, you need consequences, we get all those pieces, but I think what we've been doing historically hasn't been working. So this is just a new way to try and look at that. And again, we can then give examples of in-class, pieces. And that's what the training does. If we're in class and this happens, what do you do? And that's a lot of that time is spent talking through lots of scenarios from an elementary, middle, and high school lens. Because it's hard. That is really hardest thing to do, is to manage our spaces.
Yeah, thank you for talking through that. And I think you alluded to it, and Dr. Nestor Baker mentioned staff too, right? Because I know, like, I'm a parent, I got 3 kids, right? A piece of this and being trained is yourself, right? And how important that is. So thank you for giving this many adults the opportunity to bring it to our students, but also for themselves.
Yeah, and this does work for everybody, right? I mean, that is the important piece. And so often, right, dysregulated adults can't regulate children, right? So that's a big piece to it. And if we're having a hard day, what a better time to come in and start your classroom in a regulatory mode, right? So we can be regulated. It teaches lots of things, but it's a huge component for the adults as well, yes.
And I think it's important that it's not an ask of an extra thing. It's a shift in the things you're already doing.
Yes.
Because we can't, our teachers work so incredibly hard. And it's not fair to ask for an extra thing without taking something off. So it's more of a shift than, it's more tools. That's the goal, is to give more tools, not more asks.
And hopefully some acknowledgement that they're already doing some great things. You know, really reaffirming, like, oh yeah, I did that, but I didn't call it that. You know, resilience has been around for a long time. So just really reaffirming those things they're already doing. And give them some more tools, like Noelle said, to keep working on it.
Are there places, spaces where we could introduce this concept and this material to parents and families? As a parent, I don't know how to put this gently. Are there ways we can share this with families so that when the kids come home, I'm not unknowingly, unwittingly undoing everything that they're doing and experiencing when they're at school? So that as a parent, I can support the process and actually then take over the lead in the process to produce resilient, trauma-informed people.
Well, funny you should say that. We do have Parent Prep coming up, March 4th, where a lot of us trauma-informed mental health specialists are presenting on different topics related to coping and dysregulation and stress in students and resilience. So we do have all of those topics, and it is all from a trauma-informed lens, so you would be getting that same information.
Because I think that's our hope. I mean, they're an important part of our team when we're educating our students. So for all of us to know the same language and to do that, I think that's important.
And is there a cost for that?
Yeah, so it's free.
Okay. Yeah. And you can just go to the website and sign up?
Yep, links to below.
Yeah, and is it March 4th?
Saturday,
March 4th, 9 to 3.
Oh,
Yes.
Is it at Westerville North? It is.
It is.
Okay.
For adults only.
For adults.
For those who don't go to that, I had a similar question. I was wondering if there are ways, when you are able to take a breath, to get this information in the hands of some of our community partners. So, for instance, have a display at the library with materials that people can pick up so that those who wouldn't be inclined to go on March the 4th or who can't for whatever reason might see it at the library, might see it at the community center, might see it elsewhere, and it might spur some new ideas and interest just to help get that kind of word out, because it is actually the role of everyone in the community to help grow our children and to help them become as strong and resilient as they can be. The last thing I want to know is, can you tell us about Twinkle and tell us why it's important to have a twinkle in our eyes, so to speak?
Absolutely. Well, it's great because Twinkle, obviously, she fits right into this work. Building a safe space where you feel connected and regulated. Like, that's literally what Twinkle does. And so I think for Twinkle students, as they get off the bus in the morning or park and come in, they get to greet Twinkle every morning. And for a lot of students, that ritual, that routine of coming in and saying hi to Twinkle is part of how they start their day. Part of it is Twinkle knows her people when they come up, and she gets really excited. And to be excited, that was great when Mr. Hinsey or Miss Hammonds or I say hi, but like when Twinkle says hi, and like, so excited, like it means so much. It's been really powerful to see how many students who maybe were nervous around dogs or had past experiences that weren't great feel so safe with Twinkle. I think Twinkle just creates that safe, unconditional love space for a lot of students where they can relax, they can regulate by petting, by kind of playing with her for a second. For a lot of students, they need that second before they can then get to the frontal cortex, the part of their brain that can put words to their feelings and then talk. A lot of my students, after a couple minutes of regulating with Twinkle, are able to do a lot more work than they would be after 15 or 20 minutes of typical regulation.
I'll just say, as someone that daughter texts her all the time and says, the best part of my day is seeing Twinkle. I would agree. This is really great. Thank you so much for doing all this. I just wondering, could you videotape March 4th, those workshops, and put them up on our website? So if people, might forget something or they can't get there.
Yeah, it's a good question. We've considered some of them possibly. I will say the last 2 years we have an archive of similar parent prep sessions that are able to be viewed, so we will reiterate those pieces and see if there's any major gaps to try and fill. What we have seen about the in-person is sometimes that interaction between your audience tilts a little bit if you put a big camera in the room. So we will keep considering where our gaps are and just trying to really create that video library archive from parent prep. But it's a good reminder for us because we know not everybody can make it on that Saturday.
Thank you. Thanks for all you're doing.
Just a big thank you. Ladies, this was amazing, outstanding, great work. Thanks for keep pushing everyone and bringing it to us. Miss Noel, thanks for keeping Twinkle. I mean, Twinkle is part of her family, and she takes Twinkle home every night and takes care of Twinkle with her 2 kids, and that's a big undertaking, and she does that for our kids in our district, and we really appreciate it. We appreciate all of you. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to 5.1, approve the minutes of the Board of Education meeting held on Monday, January 9th, 2023, as presented. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments here? Hearing none.
Mrs. Meyer,
Yes.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson.
Yes. We do not have any public comments this evening. That takes us to financials. 7.1, approve the financial report and investments for November and December 2022. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Marshall, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, President Davidson, members of the board. So we are going over 2 months tonight because we only had one board meeting in December, so we have November to catch up on. So for the month ended November 30th, 2022, we had in the general fund year-to-date receipts of $99.6 million and year-to-date expenditures of $83.4 million. We ended with an unencumbered general fund balance of $165.8 million. And for all funds, we had year-to-date receipts of $131 million, year-to-date expenditures of $147.9 million, and we ended with an unencumbered fund balance in November with all funds at $217.9 million. For December, month end December 31st, 2022, we had year-to-date receipts in our general fund of $103.4 million, year-to-date expenditures in our general fund of $97.6 million, and we ended with an unencumbered fund balance in the general fund at $157 million in December. For all funds, we had year-to-date receipts of $138.2 million, year-to-date expenditures of $171.4 million, and we ended with an unencumbered fund balance for all funds at $202.2 million. And just a reminder, the way we receive our property tax settlements a couple times a year, our revenues kind of ebb and flow, as does our cash flows. So that's all I have.
Any questions or comments? Hearing none.
Mr. Bell,
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker,
Yes.
Mrs. Altman,
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer,
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson.
Yes. Would it be okay if I took the personnel consent agenda as one?
Yeah.
May I have a motion for 8.1 through 8.16 for the personnel consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
And I'd like to welcome Mr. Cooper to the podium to talk to us about this.
Good evening, President Davidson, Vice President Meyer, members of the board, Ms. Marshall, and Dr. Kellogg. I don't have Twinkle with me tonight. So, I'm HR, so it's not quite as fun. The items in this evening's personnel consent agenda represent regular action with regard to resignations, employment, and contract status changes. I would like to highlight a few items, though. We have 2 MOAs for your consideration this evening. The first is with the WEA for member coverage of instructional aid duties when adequate substitute coverage is not available. The second is with the WESA with regard to emergency communication access with the Raptor application on their work and/or personal devices. Next, after 28 years of service to the district, Kyle Campbell, science teacher at North, has made the decision to retire. We wish him well in his years of retirement ahead and are thankful for his dedication to the students and community of Westerville. Lastly, it is with a heavy heart that I share the passing of Walter Nelson, who served as a custodian at Robert Frost, Mark Twain, and North during his 24-plus years with the district. He was dedicated to his job and a tremendously hard worker each and every day. We hope for strength and healing for his family and friends in the time ahead. At this time, I can answer any questions you may have.
Hearing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. We do not have any old business this evening. We do not have any new business. Recommended action standing business, 11.1 donations. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
And Ms. Baldwin's, no, you're not joining us for this, are you? Sorry, you're for the next one. Yep. I was excited. Any questions or comments here?
Well, always a huge thank you, and I really want to call out, especially we have several donations that offset unpaid meal balances, and so just thank you to all the generous individuals, companies that have helped cover our kiddos' meals. So thank you.
That's great.
Great. Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. 11.2, out-of-state and overnight field trips. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
And now Ann's with us. Welcome, Ann Baldwin. Good evening, President Davidson, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, Ms. Marshall. Before you tonight is a request for the Westerville North baseball team to travel for spring break to Georgia. This is actually, you approved a previous trip for them to go to Myrtle Beach, but they were able to find a more affordable trip for their team, and so they're really excited about this opportunity to travel to Georgia. They won't miss any days of school as it's during spring break. Any questions or comments? Hearing none? Thank you.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. 11.3, purchase of school buses. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Welcome, Mr. Dorn.
Thank you. Good evening, President Davidson, Vice President Meyer, members of the board, Dr. Kellogg, and Ms. Marshall. This resolution is requesting the authorization to purchase 9 buses from Cardinal Bus Sales and Service for $1,091,394. The 9 new buses will replace existing buses that will be retired from our fleet. We operate on a 14-year replacement cycle as recommended by our 2004 state audit, and we need to replace these buses under those guidelines. Funding for these vehicles will come from the Capital Improvements Levy funds that the community approved on May 5th of 2009. The buses were bid through Meta Solutions Cooperative, with Cardinal Bus Sales and Services identified as the lowest responsible bid for the 72 passenger buses. The cost per 72 passenger conventional propane bus is $121,266. Like many other items recently, this is a significant increase from last year's $105,000, which was $9,500 more than the previous year. The good news is that this 2-year increase of about 26% in cost per vehicle is expected to be offset by a 35% Ohio EPA grant for propane buses, which is almost $400,000. This resolution will also authorize additional appropriations for the 499 other state and local grant funds in preparation for this grant purchase. It is recommended that the board approve the purchase of the 9 72-passenger conventional propane buses from Cardinal Bus Sales and Services for a total cost of $1,091,394.
Just one quick question. You were stressing the word propane, so I'm going to ask, why we are choosing propane buses as opposed to any of the other options? What's the advantage for us?
They're cleaner, right? That's an advantage for everybody. Right now, the cost, we've seen other conventional diesel buses at higher costs for us. We get some grant money available. And we are now, we've been doing this for several years in a row. We've now passed the 50% mark for our bus fleet is now more than 50% propane.
Great, thank you.
Scott, we instituted the 14-year replacement cycle in 2004. As you said, are you, and is the team, still comfortable with that time frame?
We are, and I think, we could probably even push it if we wanted to, but then you get into additional maintenance costs, so it's not really productive for us to do something like that. But yes, we are feeling very good about the 14-year cycle. It's not too long, if that's the concern.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none?
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. 11.4, approve the cooler freezer combo unit replacements at Heritage Middle School and Westerville South High School. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Dorn.
Thank you. Again, our maintenance department has evaluated the conditions of these 2 cooler freezer combo units at Heritage Middle School and Westerville South High School and have recommended their replacement. Both of these units are 35 years old, installed in 1987, and have exceeded their expected useful life of 20 years. These units support our kitchen operations and are being funded as part of the food services budget. Bids were solicited in accordance with the Ohio Revised Code on December 19th. We received 2 bids that were publicly read on January 10th. The lowest bid for both locations was a combination bid submitted by Ultimax in the amount of $406,410. That bid includes both alternates, which would be replacing the concrete slabs under each of the combo units if needed. You have to actually take the units out to find out if you need to replace it, so it could be a few dollars less. Ultimax has been the successful bidder for multiple projects throughout the district, and based on their performance, we continue to request their participation in the bidding process. It is being recommended that the board accept Ultimax's bid as presented.
Any questions or comments? Hearing none?
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. 11.5, transportation driver hiring incentives. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Mr. Dorn.
Thank you. If you recall, in 2019, we piloted a program. We made it an ongoing program in 2020. In 2022, we adjusted the incentive amounts, the rates for signing bonuses and referral bonuses. This resolution that is in front of you is to modify the administration of the hiring incentive program for bus drivers. There are no changes in the amounts of any of the bonuses or referrals. Rather, the changes in this resolution will allow the administration of the program to be modified to attract drivers with earlier installments of those financial rewards. That's it.
Any questions or comments?
This is one tiny thing I would have pointed out earlier if I noticed it. I think there's a with missing under number 2. In installments consistent with the signing bonus installments. So I just wanted to point that out.
Ms. Marshall, can you add the with?
Ready to vote? Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. 12.1, public comments. We do not have any public comments this evening, so that takes us to 13.1, board comments. And who would like to go first? Or go at all?
Just one thing, want to thank Lula and all of those that came along with her this evening for their kind words of appreciation. We want to certainly thank them. Dr. Kellogg, Ms. Marshall, thank you for your kind words of appreciation this evening as well.
I just want to echo what you said. It means so much to hear those words, and very deep gratitude for the words from both of you, Dr. Kellogg and Ms. Marshall, and from Lula and her wonderful families.
And I will third that and say, now we can't say we don't have a crystal ball, because we do. I'm not sure what we see in there, but right, we need a magic 8-ball. And I do just really want to express my condolences to Mr. Nelson's family, the tremendous loss for students and the schools, and just really holding them in our hearts. So.
I would echo my colleagues' comments and also just say thanks to every staff member that's working really hard to make it such a great school district. I do have 2 legislative updates. So on January 11th, Senator Renanke reintroduced his bill to reform the functions and responsibilities of the State Board of Education, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, and ODE, the Department of Education. It's Senate Bill 1. And to remind people quickly, it creates a Department of Education workforce with a cabinet-level director appointed by the governor and approved by the Senate, so adding more politics into our schools. Dividing the agency into 2 divisions, the Division of Primary and Secondary Education, which will also include preschool, and the Division of Career Technical Education, authorizes the new department to be responsible for the rulemaking process and the enforcement of current rules, and maintains the current structure of the State Board of Education, but limiting its duties to teacher licensure, educator or staff conduct, and territory transfer decisions. It had its first sponsor hearing in the Senate Education Committee, the chair happens to be a senator in our district, Senator Andrew Brunner, who also is a co-sponsor of the bill. And then Senator Frank Hoagland reintroduced his Senate bill that allows veterans to teach without a license. It's been referred to the Senate Education Committee, but no further hearings have been held. I think that's Senate Bill 11 or 14. I forgot to write it down, but that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Just thank you again to Lula and the families, and to John and Nicole for all the kind words. Very much appreciated. And thank you for all of you that came tonight. I would like to announce the liaison positions for the year 2023. Operations and Facilities will be Christy Meyer. Community Engagement and Communication will be Mr. Vongo. Human Resources, I will take that. Curriculum and Academic Achievement will be Dr. Nancy Nestor Baker. Legislation, Christy would like to continue doing that. Finance will be Jen Altman, and Policy will be all of us. So that is for next year. If you have any questions, please just let us know. To the people that we will be working with, will you please reach out to us and let us know some next steps? We would appreciate that for getting together and up to speed. And that is it for me. 14.1, the board will meet in special session at 7 p.m. Thursday, January 26th, 2023 at the Everell Barn for the annual City Council and Board of Education meeting, and a regular session on Monday, February 13th, 2023 at 6 p.m. here at the Early Learning Center. And then 15.1, executive session for the purpose of discussing employment and compensation of a school employee. May I have a motion to enter executive session?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. And there will be no action taken after.
7:11.
Okay, we have returned from our executive session, and now we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Second.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Dr. Nestor Baker?
Yes?
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Davidson?
Yes. And with that, we're adjourned.